Reading Rainbow ended, and I'm very sorry to see this show and its host of 26 years go off the air. I listened to an interview with LeVar Burton on NPR with Neil Coney, of course, and they talked about the show and LeVar's career. Sorry to call you by your first name, but I feel like we know you. LeVar, because A, it's such a beautiful name, but B, it's like you play yourself in all of your roles. So Kunta Kinte, the LeVar Burton on Star Trek, the LeVar Burton directing episodes of Deep Space Nine, the LeVar Burton, the actor behind those quirky goggles, handicapping him even as an actor amongst the other actors as the token Negro, interestingly, and yet his handicap, metaphorically perhaps, allowed him to see more than others, greater than others, an interesting kind of racial metaphor for Star Trek. But LeVar Burton, is one of those actors that, like Shah Rukh Khan here in India, who you feel like at least, that he plays himself in all these different roles. There are a number of actors kind of like that, like Tom Hanks, in all these different roles, you're looking at Tom Hanks and an aspect of Tom Hanks. It's a kind of acting that they do, a kind of way that they portray as actors. And so looking at Reading Rainbow as a kid, I saw it as, that's Kunta Kinte standing there. He's picked out his afro some. He's neat, he's clean, but he's cool. That's Kunta Kinte asking kids about books, getting kids to talk critically, listening to kids, valuing their opinions, expecting that they have opinions, showing how reading is integrated into different parts of our lives. Like one caller in the show remembered the pizza dough recipe that she made, and she was lamenting about how it was the best recipe. She'd never been able to duplicate it. Again, she tried and tried and tried, and she basically wanted LeVar Burton to tell her where on the internet she could find that episode. Of course, Mr. Burton gave a diplomatic answer, and by 2 questions later, some other, fan of Reading Rainbow had given the link, shared the link with the show. It's funny how all of this works, but this is to say that they effectively, the son of an English teacher, effectively cultivated, as he said, their mission was to cultivate a passion in not just reading, but the written word. And this is what I find interesting, because it's one of those particular interfaces of Africans in the New World, and coming from this tradition of griots that he talks about, of using the spoken word to talk about, to tell stories, and to translate that, to see how this translates into the written word. And I think that Reading Rainbow, for many of us, was that bridge in so many ways between the spoken word and the written word, our oral tradition and adopting a written tradition, or interfacing with, and sort of how these two traditions can really speak to one another. And so this is what this show, for me, as a kid, I saw all of this happening in front of me. Of course, I didn't have the words then to describe it, but thinking about what Reading Rainbow has meant to me, and then I want to talk more about this idea of how Reading Rainbow bridged all of those things. First of all, you have this character from a character in a movie that was a book. We had the book Roots, huge, thick book. Everybody I knew had a copy of Roots sitting somewhere, and we would read passages from Roots. And connected to Reading Rainbow, perhaps even inspired by Reading Rainbow. I remember my friend's mother, she would have us read passages of Roots to her. And so we could connect, again, the written word, the spoken word, these stories. We would even talk about them, like in Reading Rainbow. We would talk about what was happening in this situation. Who was this? What was this? Why was this? And she would listen to us, just like in Reading Rainbow. So again, cultivating not just a passion for words, but a passion for storytelling and a passion, therefore, of critical thinking, of being able to look at information, take in information, appreciate information and how it's told, but also appreciate what's being said behind what's just written, between the lines, beyond the written words, beyond just the spoken word, but the entirety of, Kunta Kinte, my name is Toby, of him just being whipped. So you look at scenes like that, and, you can't get away from that scene where LeVar Burton in Roots was beaten into submission. And, we're thinking this, by this time in the movie, we've seen a whipping, we know what a whipping is, and to see him endure a beating like that, it's one of those scenes where you have to contemplate and contemplate and contemplate. And again, let me remind you that we're talking about, this is an aspect of LeVar Burton, all of this, because he's, again, one of those people who sort of becomes that character, and therefore becomes a part of him. So also the Geordi. And so that's what Lieutenant LaForge on Star Trek. I mean, in seeing someone who is so diverse in their talents inspires us to be diverse in our own talents. And that's another message the one got from the show. But I want to go back to this idea of, of how the show connected oral and written traditions and incorporated that through critical thinking. And so if we're looking at literally me growing up mirroring what's going on in this television show, I mean, that's a pretty, how would you say, culturally influential narrative of 26 years of Reading Rainbow. Would NBC, CBS, ABC, would they carry such a show that not just dumbs down information, but gets kids to loving, deciphering, becoming interested in, wanting to absorb. I want to not only just think about this book, I want to, hey, well, this is a recipe book. I mean, it's like a precursor to the Jamie Oliver books in one way. I mean, just as one sort of stream that this book has, that tradition of Reading Rainbow has inspired, of storytelling. And I think we're good storytellers. I think Obama's a great narrator, orator. Obviously, Dr. King was one. Obviously, people who influence people. This is in itself a skill. And bringing this griot tradition, I think LeVar Burton has done that well. And I think that he's helped a lot of people, like Geordi, see much more than they thought that they were limited to seeing. You get that? To see much more than they were limited. I think all of his characters ask for this, including the Reading Rainbow, host, ask us to not see anything as a handicap, but see much more than you thought you could see. And always have the compassion to sit next to someone. Because remember, this is also a part of all of these characters, is to understand the other person's condition. That's Reading Rainbow to me. I love that show. I'm sad to hear that it's gone off the air. Bring it back. Sing it back. Bring it back. Bring back Reading Rainbow. Bring it back. Sing it back. Bring it back. Bring back LeVar Burton. Bring it back.